temples. For some, the word brings up pictures of Indiana Jones and its heart-wrenching action scenes, or for others, it's ancient Greece or ancient Israel. But for many today, temples are actually a very contemporary, normal thing. New temples are built all the time, and today they can actually get a little tacky with all of its modern lighting and weird kind of effects they put on it. Some estimate that in Taiwan there are over 30,000 temples, with 18,000 of those being Taoist, which is primarily kind of the stuff we talk about here at Pilgrimage Films. The reality is temples have so many details and aspects that we'd be here until Black Widow finally released if we were to talk about all of that, which is probably 2027 at this point. Sorry that's so heartbreaking. So today we're going to start part 1 of our temple series, and we're going to talk about just some small aspects of it and cover some of the outer aspects of a Taiwanese temple. So the first thing to realize is that Taiwanese temples come in all shapes and sizes. They can actually be made from wood, stone, metal, or even shell. Really anything. Like seriously, one time I went to a temple and the entire thing was made from the hollowed out husks and corpses of crustaceans and mollusks. Temples can also vary greatly in size, so sometimes they're just a small family shrine with an altar and some items. One time, for instance, we were in our neighborhood and we went to a little local market where a guy was selling meat, and he just points in the back and we see, oh my gosh, like his entire back of his business is just this homemade temple, and it's huge. And so they really can be sort of anything, and there's a lot of freedom for how temples are made. And so this guy actually let us go inside and see the specific family god he had, which protects him and his business. Taiwanese temples also have a relatively common structure though. Most of them will fall into some sort of a framework. Even though they can be a lot of different sizes, you're going to see some of the same items. So for instance, when you first arrive at a temple, outside will be anything from a parking lot to a large outer courtyard with some objects for worship, or sometimes even booths for food. And in this courtyard, you're going to find oftentimes a furnace, which you don't want to have a furnace in your temple usually because it's a little bit hard to, breathe with those fumes. And they use it to burn spirit money. And you'll have paper that basically will have a gold stamp or a silver stamp, maybe foil is a better word. And it will show whether or not it's going to a god or for the ancestors. And this furnace is really important. It's called the Jinglu. These furnaces can actually be very simple, like the type of furnace you would see maybe some German children would push a nice old lady in the woods who makes a house out of candy into.
Tell me the fairy tale again.
It's too scary, start seeing things that aren't there.
Or they can be really elaborate with dragons and lions and this complex art and really look otherworldly. There's also going to be something called a shanglu or a censer. And a censer is simply a vessel where you burn incense in it, and they can look a little bit wild sometimes and be swung around at festivals. But in temples, you're normally going to see it's kind of like a big bowl, and it's going to have feet, and people are going to put their incense into it, and that's part of the worship ceremony. The one that's outside a temple is known actually specifically as a Tiangonglu, which means the Emperor of Heaven's kind of incense burner. So there's this idea of it specifically going to like Tiangong. Some people often ask too, what does incense smell like? Almost exactly like what you'd find in an American store full of hippies. Like if you've ever been to a store in America where it's just selling knickknacks and then they're also like, you little bus incense man. It's basically that smell. Like incense smells like incense. In front of the temple, you're usually going to see doors that are painted bright red, and they're going to be old and rustic, made out of wood, kind of like something Joanna Gaines would really love.
You've said that a few times before.
Or, more rarely, you might actually see these huge metal-like doors that remind me a lot of the boss fights from Super Mario World. You often see door gods that protect the temple, such as our old classic homies, Thousand Mile Eye and One Falling Ear, and they keep bad spirits out. They're sort of like celestial bouncers. And there's usually also a raised wooden threshold, which is like a little piece of wood that you step over when you enter a temple. And there's different stories as to why this exists. Some say if you step on it, you're stepping on evil spirits and they're gonna haunt you. Some actually say it relates again to our favorite Chinese vampire, since he kind of like jumps, but he can't jump very high. He can't get over the threshold and protects him. My favorite explanation put forward by Eastwood was that it actually might just be there to keep vendors from coming in, which if you know anything about kind of shop culture, when they go to a night market and the cops show up and they just start, vendors pack up and roll out. I could very well see some guy kind of roll into a temple and be like, you want to buy some sausages? And that just making it really difficult to do that. The front usually actually has several doors. There's going to be side doors, and the side doors are normally used for exiting and entering, with the main doors are more properly reserved for a ceremony or if a god was visiting the temple. Whenever I think my work is done, then I start back at one. Compare and contrast. So, how do temples in Judaism compare? Judaism has a temple in the Old Testament, but it's not like Taiwan at all. Like, there's some things that are similar, but there's basically no creative freedom. The rules are extremely strict. And if you go into the back for a peek to be like, I just want to go see what's in the back of the temple, you will be struck dead by an immortal, powerful, omnipotent God.
Maybe believing in God was a mistake.
It was actually said that the high priest would put a rope around himself and put some bells on his clothes, and he'd go into the back to do his kind of work in the Holy of Holies, but if he had sinned, he'd get struck dead. So they'd be listening, and if they stopped hearing the bells for a long time, maybe they'd tug on the rope and be like, But then they'd know that he's dead and pull the corpse out.
What are those doors over there?
Behind these doors is the Holy of Holies, earthly domain of the gods, a place so ineffably sacred, so powerful, that to enter is instant death.
Who cleans it?
Needs no cleaning.
Kind of makes you think about the people that built it, you know, like did they die instantly? Or were they given a courtesy second to get out of there by the gods?
They were allowed to finish it, and given exactly 4.5 seconds when the gods descended.
Wow. If the bug goes in there?
Instant death for the buck.
So are there dead bugs all over the floor? Because you said nobody cleans it.
They're vaporized.
And that's kind of like a really crazy story, but that's how serious the idea of holiness before God was in the Jewish temple. So the temple was the place where God would connect with mankind in Israel, and man would live as priests there, and they would spread the goodness and glory of the God of Israel. But paradoxically, actually, the temple was not a house for God. God chooses when he dwells at the temple. So what was the temple like? Strict.
Anything that we think might be out of bounds, we put on this list.
There's only one proper temple, so this was built around the time of wise and rich King Solomon, so that'd be about 957 BCE. And this first temple actually ends up getting destroyed. And then they rebuild it later on, and that rebuilt temple is called the Second Temple. And the Second Temple actually gets destroyed around 70 CE. And despite this, around that time, they actually started praying for a third temple. And even today, after thousands of years, the Jewish people are praying that a third temple will be built. But they can't build one right now. And part of this brings up one of the most controversial locations on Earth. So around 600-700 AD, there was a Muslim group that built a very specific mosque on the Temple Mount, and what we would call the Dome of the Rock. And what makes the Temple of Jerusalem very interesting is that Jewish people can't just build the temple anywhere. It has to be in a specific location. It has to be a specific proper temple. And this temple is actually where they would do their worship practices. Like, you weren't allowed to just always be worshiping anywhere you want. You could just go in the mountains and be like, I'm gonna build a temple on this mountain and just sacrifice and go. Like, you could do things the wrong way in Judaism. There was a clear path laid out through the scriptures.
It's here that they believe Abraham, as a test of his faith, was asked to sacrifice his son, Isaac. Considering this spot the center of the earth, Jews have worshipped here for 3,000 years.
Second aspect about it, though, the temple was huge. So unlike Taiwanese temples, which come in many shapes and sizes, the Jewish temple only really came in two sizes, the first and second size. Because the first size was a little bit smaller, and then when they rebuilt it, they made it a more elaborate one. It's called Herod's Temple, and they tried to make it really kind of grander than it was. But even the first temple was extremely grand. It was this beautiful building that could be seen from far away. Things inside were made with tons of gold, and there's a lot of just beautiful artwork, but the artwork was mostly plants. And when you got to the temple, you'd see these high walls, an immense gate, and no human images. And that's why it was kind of only plants. You see, Judaism is aniconic. They don't have this art in the form of humanity because they don't want to entertain idolatry. So unlike a Taiwanese temple, which has lots of pictures of folk heroes and spirits and all this, you would have kind of a pretty plain but gorgeous outside of the temple. No door gods, no spiritual creatures, no folk heroes. It was all about the God of Israel, and it pointed to one God. And even if there was some sort of an image or something that was not just life, like palm trees or pomegranates, it would have a very specific purpose, such as the cherubs you see on the mercy seat. Much of what we would say about the temple looks similar. They had a censer and they had altars, and a lot of that laid inside of the temple, but that's kind of a story for another day. There's just so much to this. But did you know that if you were to do the incense practice at the Jewish temple, that if you used the wrong incense, it was a big deal and you could be struck dead? It was strict, and it was very clear what the practices of Israel were. And what we really see here when we compare and contrast them is the concept of holiness, and holiness itself is the concept of being set apart. Because you see, in folk religion, we see more of this like buffet, where people go to the God they need at the moment.
Maybe there's some sort of animal that we could make a sacrifice to, like something with the body of a walrus, with the head of a sea lion.
And we actually covered this in our idol series. We did a video on how folk religions tend to actually use idols to leverage gods and get a little bit of power over them. You can kind of do what you want. Judaism, though, shows a very loving and compassionate God, but it's also a God who's very justice-oriented. He doesn't play around with sin. The rules matter. So you purify yourself before you go into his presence, and you follow rules and commands, and you don't worship how you want. You worship how God wants you to worship. End of story. Man submits to God, and there's no leverage over the God of the universe. And I think these two ideas are very profound ideas that kind of show the difference in how the religions operate. That there's a lot of just ideas and thoughts in folk religion, and there's not always a clear cause or idea behind it.
The head of a monkey with the antlers of a reindeer, with the body of porcupine.
But in Judaism and later on Christianity, every single thing we do that involves worship and a spiritual practice, for the most part, has to be rooted in scripture, or otherwise we say, like, we're in danger of doing things the wrong way. Thank you for joining us this week as we talk about temples. There's a lot of really interesting, exciting stuff. This will kind of be something that builds on itself over the following weeks and months. Thank you so much for following us with Pilgrimage Films. Again, we appreciate it when you like, comment, but we really appreciate it when you subscribe and you tell your friends about us. I actually had someone who said, I subscribed to your channel because the illustrious Travis McNeely recommended it to me. That was incredible. Thanks, Travis. Shout out. Have you ever seen a temple? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Till next time, bye. Mouth, eye, and wind following the ear. Where did that come from? I gotta go stop the line messages. This has literally been the worst recording session I've had in years, decades really.